Good afternoon, everyone. I am David Festa, and I am Vice President for the Ecosystems work here at EDF. And I want to welcome our studio audience here in San Francisco, as well as the many friends we have joining us on the phone and online. So welcome, everybody. We're here to talk about the work that EDF is doing to end fertilizer pollution. But before we get into that, I want to just talk a little bit about some housekeeping details. First of all, if you need to reach an operator during the call, hit the star key followed by 0. And if you are online, or if you like to get on the line to ask a question, hit the star key and then press 1. And if you want to submit a question online, that's easy too. Just type it into the dialog box that you see on your screen, and we'll read it aloud. And of course, for everybody in the room, just wave at me, and we'll get questions queued up. The way it's going to happen is we're going to give you about 15, 20 minutes of overview, and then turn it over to questions. I wanted to introduce a few people before we started. First of all, my presenting partner to my left is Jenny Allen, and she is the manager of our supply chain work. She's based in Bentonville. And on the phone, we have Susie Friedman. She's based in Washington, D.C., although she has been to Iowa on so many times recently that there's rumors that she's running for president. And she is the director of our agricultural sustainability work. So they will both be with us for, well, Jenny will be speaking, and Susie will be available to ask questions. So with that, I am going to dive in and just say that we're very excited here about the work that we have launched to end fertilizer pollution. And I thought you might like to have a little context for that work. EDF's vision is to meet human needs for food, water, and coastal protection in ways that benefit natural systems. And we've identified 4 must-have components. And they're up there on the screen. One of them is to end fertilizer pollution from food production. The second is to reverse habitat loss on working lands. These are our farms, ranches, and forests. The third is to rebuild natural infrastructure, protect coastal cities by rebuilding natural infrastructure. And then finally, revitalizing working rivers. Each of these is tied together with a common theory of change, which is pretty straightforward, that if we reward landowners who generate environmental benefits, they will deliver more of those environmental benefits, thus helping us reach our vision of meeting human needs in ways that benefit natural systems. And having that core theory of change also helps us to focus our work and develop synergies among each of the sections. So today we're going to talk about one of them, and that's fertilizer. And you know, I'll be the first to admit that fertilizer at first blush sounds a little unglamorous. But I'd like to ask a rhetorical question, would you be interested if I told you there was one thing, one action, that if we took that action, we would improve drinking water, we would fight climate change, we would restore coastal habitat, and we would improve the quality of life in rural communities, just with one action? Well, of course, yes, tell me more, David. Of course, that is what you get when you end fertilizer pollution. And one of the problems is that fertilizer is sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of the environment. It doesn't get a lot of respect, and that's usually, or at least get a lot of excitement, and that's usually because people think about problems from the problem perspective, from a single problem perspective, like fighting climate change. And in all of those 4 that I mentioned, those 4 problems, fertilizer is on the list of top 10, but it's probably 8 or 9. It's down the list. So if you care about climate change, you get immediately drawn to things like coal-fired power plants and transportation, these other things. You don't actually get the attention on fertilizer. But if you were to turn that question around, which is what we did here at EDF, and we said, all right, from the lens of where our talents, our resources could get the most bang for the buck, fertilizer comes right to the top of the list because of the multiple benefits that you get when you attack this problem. So let me just go in a little bit, give you a little bit more about sort of what some of these problems are. That map that you see there, the satellite image that you see, is a graphic reminder of one of the reasons why we care about fertilizer pollution. This is the western end of Lake Erie, and all that green stuff is a toxic algal bloom. Algae loves fertilizer, and when farm runoff combines with the right conditions, the result is a problem big enough to see from space. And when you get down on the ground level, it looks like this. And it's pretty gross, right? But actually, gross isn't really our problem. It's called toxic algal bloom for a reason. Fish can't live in it. We can't drink it. You can't even wash with it. 500,000 people last summer from Ohio and Michigan took to the streets foraging for water that quickly came in short supply. So here encapsulates the irony of the whole thing, which is that in meeting human needs, the collateral damage to our waterways and climate now threatens our ability to meet human needs. And Toledo is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a map of the Mississippi River Basin. The red stuff at the bottom is a dead zone that's the size of Connecticut. If you look at the little map on the right-hand side, you can see where all of that is coming from. And last month, the city of Des Moines, Iowa, near the top of that map, actually sued 3 upstream counties to reduce fertilizer runoff that was running into the city's main drinking water. So now we're starting to get conflicts between urban and rural because of fertilizer pollution. And this problem isn't limited to the U.S. Scientists estimate that there are more than 400 dead zones around the world. And that's just the water quality problems. Going to the next slide, overuse of nitrogen fertilizer also contributes to climate pollution. Nitrogen that's not absorbed by the crops is converted into a gas called nitrous oxide, and that's a greenhouse gas that's 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Now you can see that top number, 6%, that's the total of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions that are nitrous oxide. Like I was saying earlier, it goes 6%. Well, we can let that slide. But look at the next number, 75%. That's how much of that nitrous oxide comes from agricultural soil management. So if we get that right, we take 6% off the top virtually for free. So it makes an important contribution to meeting our goals on climate change as well. So thanks to years of work with stakeholders, including scientists, farmers, and industry, there's now a consensus on the practices that can dramatically reduce fertilizer pollution. And I'll give you 3 of the most important ones. One is fertilizer optimization, applying just the right amount of fertilizer in just the right place at just the right time so that less is lost to the environment. The plant's actually able to take up as much as you put on there. The second is planting something called cover crops. These crops soak up the extra nitrogen that's left on the fields after the harvest of the cash crops. And the final one is no-till farming, which sounds pretty much like what it is. Scaling up these practices would be really big, as big as another iconic EDF victory, and that is acid rain. In the late 1980s, acid rain was a top priority. EDF helped catalyze a solution that has so effectively addressed power plant emissions, a major cause of acid rain, that the environmental community has been able to turn its attention to other threats. And I think we are at an inflection point with fertilizer pollution. We can galvanize stakeholders around the goal of eliminating agriculture as a major source of fertilizer pollution in the U.S. in 10 years. Now, every great journey starts with a first step, and our first step is making the commitment that Walmart made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions a success. And for us, success means that it catalyzes a change throughout agriculture, not just on the farms serving Walmart. With that, let me turn it over to Jenny.
Thanks, David. So let's start with why Walmart is the right corporate partner. They make up, as you can see in this pie chart, an incredible amount of the U.S. grocery market. They dwarf all of their competitors. And in fact, grocery sales now make up at least 60% of Walmart's overall sales. And that's here domestically, and it's an even larger percentage when you look internationally. In addition to that, back in 2010, at the urging of EDF and other NGOs, Walmart set a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their supply chain, 20 million metric tons. This put them in a really strong position in combination with their strong presence in the grocery market to actually do something to tackle the way we produce food. We saw this as a great opportunity to challenge Walmart to do something about fertilizer. So at our urging, they chose it as one of the main projects that they're using to try and reach this goal of 20 million metric tons. The work became real in July of 2013 when a group of Walmart suppliers were asked by their buyers. So the buyers are the people who decide what Walmart sells. They asked their top suppliers, so the General Mills and the Pepsis of the world, to join them in doing something about fertilizer. As a result, we got 29 buyers from Walmart and Sam's Club to choose fertilizer as their sustainability priority. So they went and asked their top suppliers to participate. And these buyers range a number of categories, everything from lunch meat to carbonated beverages to packaged cereal to dairy products. So they went out and asked their top suppliers, and as a result, they got 15 suppliers who said, yes, we will work on fertilizer optimization. 15 suppliers may not sound like much, but together these companies represent 30% of food and beverage sales in North America. So a really big footprint. And in those plans, they are addressing fertilizer application on a number of crops, including the ones we care about most, which are corn, soybeans, and wheat, as well as other crops like sugar beets, oats, and barley. To make this a little more tangible, this map depicts the geographic distribution of what's included in those plans. So the green areas you see are the states and provinces where farmers will be engaged in fertilizer optimization activity. We have coverage in 22 states across the country, as well as 6 provinces in Canada. And you can see that both corn and wheat have a large number of states being engaged, with 14 each. For corn, we've got the Mid-Atlantic through the Midwest. Similar coverage for wheat, but headed further into the west. And then we ended up in places we didn't expect, like oats took us to Canada, and we've got oranges in Florida. So a lot of diversity in where this activity is likely to take place. Now, part of making our strategy a success, as well as helping Walmart succeed in their goals, is really helping the food companies figure out how to do this. How do they develop a fertilizer plan that'll work? And one of the big challenges is that this is a very long and complex supply chain. And so this slide tries to demonstrate that complexity. At the top, you've got the retailer, Walmart here, in this case. And then you have to work your way down through the food companies, through their grain aggregators where they get their grain, down through the ag service and information providers, and down to the farmers. We've spent a lot of time looking at how this system works and figuring out the most efficient ways to engage. And we've done that with a number of different food companies. So the first food company we started working with on doing this is Murphy Brown. Murphy Brown is the pork subsidiary for Smithfield. They're the largest pork producer in the country. And they had been aware of the work that Susie, who's on the phone, had been doing in this space for a number of years. And so when Walmart asked them to develop a fertilizer plan, they came to Susie and they said, you know, can you help us do this? We want to do this well. And so we've been working with them now for the last year or two on a collaboration to help them design an in-house program for how they're going to optimize fertilizer. So they source a lot of corn and other feed grains, really hundreds of thousands of acres of grain. And so they've developed a program to address fertilizer optimization for those grains. As a result, last year they were recognized by Walmart as one of the best-in-class supplier plans that have been developed to date. In addition, we're working in collaboration with World Wildlife Fund, Coca-Cola, and ADM on a project related to the high fructose corn syrup that's made from corn they source in Illinois. We have a project with General Mills and their grain supplier, Manel Milling, in Ohio and Illinois that's focused on corn, wheat, and soy, which are often grown in rotation. And then additionally, we're developing a partnership, hopefully with the Campbell Soup subsidiary, Pepperidge Farm, who uses Cargill as their grain supplier. And Cargill's a really unique company in that they're a grain supplier to some, they're a direct supplier to Walmart, but they also have a branch that provides services to farmers. So I want to draw your attention to that ag information and service provider line of this image. We've always known that these companies, so the companies who are working directly with farmers, they're selling them products, they're giving them information, they're helping them in the fields actually do the work, that they're really critical to making all of this come together, that they're the ones who have the trust and the influence of the farmer. And early on, it was challenging to get them to want to engage with us directly. But once we added in that Walmart demand signal, we really got their attention. And suddenly, they were paying attention. And some of them, like United Suppliers, who I'll talk about in a little more detail, are really stepping forward to be leaders in this space. So let's go then and look at what does the impact of all of this look like? What are we seeing? So we're going to look at it a couple of different ways. We're going to start with acres committed. So across the bottom, you see years, and then on the y-axis, we have the total crop acres engaged in millions of acres. And we're going to talk about it in kind of three big groups. One is going to be the piece that we control, we EDF control. The second is going to be through the people we're influencing. And then the third gets back to what David pointed out in the opening about our strategic plan and really wanting those economic incentives to catch on. And that's the piece where this work really is catalyzed and it's kind of taking off and the work is happening almost without us. So the first piece is the farmer network. So farmer networks are where certified crop consultants work with small groups of farmers and help them really figure out what are the tools and information they need to optimize their fertilizer use. This is the work that Susie's been doing for over 10 years. It's the foundation of where all of this work is coming from. And we've gotten them going in a number of states, including big corn-producing states like Indiana and Illinois. And this was also really the foundation that helped us make a compelling case to Walmart about why this could actually be done and how we could be successful. So through this work, as it's growing, we anticipate that by 2020, we'll have about 3 million acres engaged in fertilizer optimization activity through those networks. Now, when you add in that Walmart demand signal, so the activity that's happening from their suppliers and the resulting ripple effects, you see a really big increase in the number of acres we're projecting to get. So by 2020, we go from 3 million acres to a total of 10 million acres, which is great. And then that last piece gets to when things really start taking off, and when you add in those ag information and service providers. So when they start identifying a business opportunity, when they see that if they go out and they sell these services to farmers to help them really optimize their fertilizer use, that's where we really see the pickup. And so the company I mentioned a minute ago, United Suppliers, they're one of the biggest, they're cooperative, they're one of the biggest in the country in terms of selling fertilizer and other products to farmers and giving them services. And they actually heard about this work that EDF was doing with Walmart through a story in USA Today, which was spurred by an EDF blog post about our work. So they came to us and they said, how do we get involved? What do we do? And as a result, we've been working with them for the last year to help them develop a brand new program just to deliver fertilizer optimization to their customers. And when we look at what that could possibly do, we add another 10 million acres of potential committed acres to fertilizer optimization by 2020. So really scaling our work dramatically. In addition to talking about the acres, acres are really a proxy for what we care about most, which is the environmental impact. And so in this case, given that we're working with Walmart and greenhouse gases is really a big driver for them, we've translated this roughly into what is the greenhouse gas benefit that we see. And so we've added the new axis on the right-hand side, which shows the cumulative greenhouse gas savings. And so that's looking at total greenhouse gas savings and millions of metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And what we see is that by 2020, just based on this acreage alone, we should have 10 million metric tons of greenhouse gas reductions. If you relate all of this back to EDF's strategic plan, we want to make fertilizer pollution obsolete. We've ballparked that we want to get about 45 million acres of cropland engaged in fertilizer optimization to get us there. So you can see that we're well on our way just with these first few steps of reaching that goal, and we have a lot of momentum that we're going to continue to build upon to get there.
So I think you can see why I'm excited about our work. Two reasons. One, we can get a major environmental problem solved, and two, we're setting in motion a process that can solve other problems. So if we get the supply chain working this way and working to eliminate a farming practice or promote other farming practices, we can apply that to other challenges in sustainable agriculture. And we have already having some initial conversations and showing great promise to apply some of these same approaches to how farmers use water. But you're going to have to wait for a future teleconference to hear more about that work. So with that, let me open it up for questions, and I will just remind everybody again that to ask a question on the phone, hit the star key and then 1. To email a question in, just type it into the dialog box on your screen, and we'll read it here. And if you're in the studio audience, just raise your hand. And Laney, were you raising your hand or just demonstrating for everybody what it looks like?
No, I definitely was. So fertilizer optimization seems to indicate that, well, gee, you'd use less fertilizer and you'd save money, but then there's probably costs associated with optimizing. So from a farmer's point of view, what's the net benefit? Is this something that's a cost savings for them across the board, or only for large farmers, or how does that work out? You didn't mention that. Yeah.
I'll give you a general answer and ask Susie to give you the specifics, because she's got some numbers. But the general answer is it's a winner from the profit point of view. The farms are more profitable and yields can go up. So Susie, do you want to toss out a few numbers?
Sure, and I apologize for any background noise. So we have estimated this is going to vary across farms, but there are real opportunities, whether the farms are small or large, are able to do some basic adaptations or very advanced, highly technical variable rates. But we estimate that a lot of farmers can save in the range of $15 to $25 an acre through more efficient use of the inputs, either just saving on inputs or getting more yield for the same inputs.
We have a question from the web.
What other major companies are you pursuing?
Jenny or Susie, do you want to talk about some of the other folks that we're in conversations with?
Sure. Well, I mentioned Cargill is one through the relationship we're building with Campbell Soup Pepperidge Farm. I think there are a few other Walmart suppliers that you saw on that earlier slide. One is Dairy Farmers of America. There are a few others that we've been talking to see if we can help them on their Walmart plan. Additionally, I think, what we're seeing happening with United Suppliers, really that ag service and information provider, if we can find more willing actors in that space, that's where we really can get a lot of leverage and scale. And so we have our feelers out to see if there are any others out there, like potentially a Cargill, who would be willing to work with us.
And the other approach that we're taking is to look for other groups that are interested in pursuing bold initiatives in the ag space. And one of those is an organization called the Clinton Global Initiative, which is organized by former president. There's some nods around the table here. They do all kinds of good stuff, but they really haven't had a sustainable ag food systems kind of goal. And I was just in New York last week and sat down with the Clinton Global Initiative folks and representatives from 14, 15 companies, household names, Nestle, Unilever, Land O'Lakes, like I said, 14, 15 household names, and put on the table for them that what we should do in the Clinton Global Initiative is come together and create a momentum to end fertilizer pollution. And I got to say, it was an incredible, given this presentation a number of times, or made that put that on the table a number of times, and this was one of the warmest receptions that I've gotten, in part because they could all see how it made sense to their businesses and to their farmers. So we're trying to look for different ways of attracting companies. So let me go to the phone first, and then.
And from the phone, we have a question from Henry Guizda from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Your line is open.
Thank you. I live close to the Chesapeake Bay, and we have a big problem in our bay with runoff. Much of it's agricultural, but I was curious to what percentage of the dead zones is produced by fertilizer, and compared to, let's say, we have problems with our municipal sewerage overflow during storms and antiquated sewage filtration plants and other sources of pollution of these dead zones compared to fertilizer. I'm not questioning the importance of it. I'm just curious about the dimensions of the total problem.
Yeah, got it. It's a great question, and it varies. It varies. So the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, the EPA has established a target for what's safe for the Gulf of Mexico, at least with respect to the dead zone, and you can hit the target that EPA has set just on the agricultural runoff, just reducing agricultural pollution. Up in Long Island Sound, it was much more about the urban runoff and sewage treatment plants, things like that. In the Chesapeake is a mix. It's still highly, still dominated by ag, but it's more of a mix in the Chesapeake. So it depends a little bit on where you are and how much ag you've got. Yes. And then
Go ahead. My question is on the pesticides and how does that figure into the scenario? I know this is focused on fertilizer, but why perhaps wasn't it paired in the Walmart initiative with the fertilizers? And also, does altering the fertilizer practice in any way impact the pesticide usage?
Yeah, great question. So in order to use the supply chain as a driver, the buying companies have to really want to do something. It's all driven by their desire to make a product or sell a product that has certain attributes. So it's very much the same as Nike saying to its suppliers, we're not buying any T-shirts if you have child labor, if you don't. So they know that their business depends on creating products in a way that consumers want them created, or have attributes that consumers want. In this instance, the driver on the Walmart side was their decision to become committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. So they made a public commitment to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 20 million metric tons. Now, once they did that, they were very, very serious about meeting the target. You could say there's many things that are true about Walmart. One of them is when they say they're going to do something, they go all in and they apply the same kind of intensity that they do, meeting that goal as they do, trying to get good prices. And so it was driven by their desire to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And when they saw how much of their greenhouse gas footprint came from fertilizer, for them it was like, okay, if we could figure this out, that's what we want to do. So the reason why we picked it. Right now there isn't a strong driver on the retail side on pesticides. But the nice thing about getting this work right is once you show how you can do it and how it's really easy to transmit a demand signal down through the supply chain and people are there, they know how to do it, then you can start working up the supply chain and say, what about pesticides? We should be doing X and Y and Z on pesticides or on water. So this is a tool that not only solves one problem, but it creates a way of working with companies they have confidence in so that they can then ask more and more of their suppliers so that we can move faster and faster to that place where we are meeting human needs in ways that benefit natural systems. I do not believe there is an impact on pesticide use. some of these practices are actually much better for soil health than the current systems. Susie, do you want to say anything on that?
Sorry, getting off mute. No, I think you covered that well.
Another question in the room.
Oh, yes. I was wondering if you could help me understand why, when you use less fertilizer, yield might go up. And also, I was wondering if you could help me understand how organics and GMO versus non-GMO factors into this at all. Are any of these crops we're talking about organic? Do organic crops use less fertilizer than GMO crops, or is it? Can you help me understand that?
Okay, so I'm going to parse it out.
Okay.
So, one, how do plants grow more if you're using less fertilizer?
Right.
Two, does this work for organic? And three, sort of what about GMOs? Okay, so the first is that it's all about, think about it this way. If I put your ability to grow depends on the food you eat. So I put a big plate of food in front of you, and you eat as much as you want. But if I put too big a plate of food in you, you just leave it. You're not going to eat it. It's exactly what happens with the plants. So the easiest thing for a farmer to do is just put a massive hunk of spaghetti in front of the plant. This is a huge plate here, because they know that, well, at least it won't starve. And just like you, if you go and exercise a whole bunch and then you sit down, you're hungrier. In plants, depending on how precipitation happens and weather, you could have weather events that if there was extra fertilizer, the plants would take it up and grow. So the farmers, don't want to take any risks. They're betting their entire livelihood every year on the crop. So they're very risk averse in terms of change. So they're going to put that big plate of spaghetti in front of the plant. And two, there are some times when over-applying actually pays off because there was a period of optimum rain or optimum sunshine, and so they kind of roll the dice. So it's not that the plant actually has less fertilizer. It's that the food, the big plate you put in front of them, is precisely the right amount for the plant. And because we have such advances in technology now, and we're so much better at weather prediction and monitoring and measuring, that we can actually get that kind of level of precision. And so you deliver just the right amount at just the right time, and the crop can take it up in the most optimum way, thus increasing yield, even while you're using less fertilizer per plant than you would otherwise. So that's the first answer. Yes, it works on organic. It doesn't matter whether you're organic or not. It's the same biology, the same mechanics.
Do the non-organic crops use more for fertilizer right now than organic? Like, how does that break down?
I don't know is the technical answer. My hunch is that there would not be a big difference in how much fertilizer an organic versus non-organic field would use. It might use it in different ways. Some of the sources are different. But in the end of the day, one of the big problems in the Chesapeake is that there's a lot of manure used and not chemical fertilizer. But it still runs off. Put it another way, you can get fat eating organic food. Just because it's organic, you still have to manage it right. It still creates the same problem. The algae love it no matter whether it was from a bag or from manure. So you still have to manage it even if it's organic. The GMOs, I'm going to actually suggest that we have a little chat afterwards on that, because it's a really fascinating question. It is, for what we're trying to do in ending fertilizer pollution, it doesn't directly affect this, so we're actually able to parse that out and put it on the side where, we actually are starting to do a process here with our chief scientist to think through sort of the pros and cons and GMOs and the issues. It's a really big one, a really important one. But for the work that we're doing on fertilizer, it's not quite on the critical path. So that's not, I hope that's not too unsatisfactory.
No, it's fine.
But I'd be happy to talk afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go to the web.
Right, I just want to first remind everyone that if you'd like to get in the queue on the phone, you can press star and then 1. This question is from Seal Craig. I noticed in the state map that California is not one of the places you're working with, if that's the correct expression. However, the Central Valley is big ag. Thoughts?
Yes. We, when it comes to fertilizer pollution, California is not the worst offender. The reason is that the kind of crops we grow here are, well, there's a bunch of reasons. One of them is, generally speaking, the crops we grow here don't use as much fertilizer, are not as high as intensity fertilizer use as the big row crops in the eastern part of the country. We don't have as much runoff here. We don't have the rainstorm events that they do in the Midwest that also create some of the runoff problem. And here, for a lot of our crops, which are very, very high value crops, there's a lot of drip irrigation, and drip irrigation allows for a more precise delivery of fertilizer. So from a fertilizer point of view, California isn't as big a deal as the other places we are working. But yes, we are working in California. We're working with, there's another aspect of the work here, which has to do with letting farmers generate carbon credits when they reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and then be able to participate in California's carbon market to sell those credits. So we are working on protocols for rice, for corn, leafy greens, and tomatoes that will generate carbon credits from fertilizer reduction and allow those to participate in the market. And then we have a number of really exciting projects in California with ag, but more on the habitat side. And we will look forward to talking to you about that and one of these on habitats. So I think we have another one from the web.
Great. This question is from Kathy McConnell. How are the middlemen, the ag service providers, managing to make money from selling less fertilizer?
Jenny, that's right up your alley.
It's a very good question. So what's interesting is that many of the ag service providers do sell farmers fertilizer, which has been one of the big challenges in getting them to engage because they're incentivized to sell more fertilizer. United Suppliers, the company I mentioned that we're working with, is very unique in that they don't manufacture fertilizer. So they sell it, but they don't have as much of a vested interest in the quantity that they're selling. And so they're shifting their business model to one where it's about the quality of the service that they're providing the farmer, not just the amount of fertilizer and other inputs that they're selling. And so that's how they plan on making money, is really being leaders in this space, that their farmers will be able to hopefully profit more and be more resilient as a result.
There is another angle, and by the way, we had a recent blog post on this, so you can check it out on our blog site, Growing Returns. But another reason, another change we're beginning to see in the fertilizer companies is they are also realizing that fertilizer pollution is a big problem. I mentioned earlier in our talk that the city of Des Moines was suing farm counties for their fertilizer pollution. So the fertilizer companies, the manufacturing companies, are realizing that this is a problem for them. But the last thing they want to become is sort of the tobacco companies, the big tobacco of 2020. They depend on being either invisible or a good reputation. So there's starting to be a greater interest, even in some, not all, by any stretch of the imagination, but some of the companies that we've been talking with about, this is a problem, we need to do something, and this kind of solution they like a lot better than Congress passing some new law or regulation, or a state passing some new law or regulation. This is sort of farmers to the rescue kind of solution, so they can get behind that. And wow, we have a lot on the web. Okay, another one from the web.
Great. Why don't you go after ethanol, since it uses a lot of corn?
Oh my God. Okay. So this is why this is like classic EDF. This answer. We're such nerds. So the issue, for those of you who haven't been following the connection between ethanol and corn, you can process corn, distill it, and turn it into ethanol. And some number of years ago, folks thought it'd be a good idea that we could get off of using more petroleum by growing our own fuel and taking corn and turning it into ethanol and then burning it in our cars for the most part. So a whole bunch of subsidies and various other incentives were put into law that favored using corn for ethanol instead of anything else. And it did produce a massive, massive shift in how much corn went to ethanol. So about 40%, I believe that's about right, 40% of corn in this country goes to make ethanol. So the argument is, well, if you got rid of all the ethanol subsidies, wouldn't you just cut the fertilizer by 40% right there? I mean, that seems like a no-brainer. So, and this is where it gets to be like totally EDF. So we went back and looked at the records for how much land in the United States is used for corn. We went all the way back to 1923, which was the first year that the USDA began keeping records. And what we found was over that nearly 100-year period, the amount of land that's planted in corn is remarkably stable. It bounces around between 70 and 90 million acres. There's years when it's been higher and years when it's been lower, but mostly it bounces around in that 70 to 90 million acres. That is an incredibly stable system. Think of how different the world was in 1923, in 1945, in 1965. Different economics, different trade routes, there was wars, there was, technology changes. And yet, that land remained fairly stable in how much corn was planted. And the reason is, it's just really, really good at growing corn. It was grassland before, corn is a grass. It grows really, really, really well there. So our hypothesis going forward is that while how corn is used will vary tremendously based on subsidies and preferences and all kinds of stuff, if we are really interested in ending fertilizer pollution, we've got to figure out how to change those practices on that 70 to 90 million acres, because we know that that is going to be in production of corn, and if it's not in production of corn, it'll be in production of wheat or soybeans, so we've got to get at that. So our core mission, the mission of this initiative is to eliminate fertilizer as a major problem from ag, and for that we actually have to get at the practices, how it's grown, not at what it's used for. Again, how it's used, really, really important. But in terms of meeting our objective in this initiative, that's why we focused on how it's grown. Let's go to the phone.
We have a follow-up question from Henry Guaisto from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Your line is open.
Yes. You mentioned that there were other dead zones in the world, and we don't read about much of that in the press and publications here. Could you just mention what they are? And perhaps I'd be curious if the model you're developing for addressing this problem would be applicable to some of these other countries or regions that have that problem?
Yes. So at the highest level, 75% of the fertilizer that's polluting waters and our climate come from three countries: the United States, China, and India. China and India have huge over-fertilization problems. National Geographic a couple months ago did a terrific story on the dead zones in China, and there are dead zones in the rivers and estuaries in India. There are other hot spots. The Nile Delta is a pretty big hot spot. There's a number of hot spots around the world as well. So it is an endemic problem. Anywhere where you have big ag, and big ag I don't mean like big farms, but I mean where you have intense agricultural production, you have this problem. So your question about how applicable is what we're doing here to the rest of the world is a really good one. And we know that the practices would work anywhere, but the scale of farming is really different. You really have to get in there and understand what the incentives are facing the farmer. So in China, for example, the average farm is very, very small. I won't give a number, but it's measured in a few acres or tens of acres. So you've got a lot of small farmers. You can't use the same kind of system that we would be using here, but the tools, the things that they would need to do, precision agriculture, cover crops, and, oh my God, how come I'm spacing out? Oh, no-till, yes, thank you, no-till, are the same, and we have begun conversations to think with our colleagues about, all right, what are the on-ramps to get into these other countries where there's a problem? I'd love, and if you have any ideas, or anybody here has ideas or connections, please let us know. We're really looking to put on-ramps for our work so they can address some of the international problems. Question from the web.
Yes, this question is from David Carter. What interests will oppose this initiative, and how powerful are they?
The fertilizer lobby was one of our biggest problems early on. Actually, I'm going to ask Susie that question. She's in the field a lot. What are the sources of opposition?
I'm sorry, is that a question for me? I couldn't quite hear.
Sorry about that. So the question is, who opposes this work? And of course,
right.
Early on, it was some of the fertilizer groups, and I'm imagining that in terms of direct opposition. Well, Susie, why don't you opine?
Sure. So certainly parts of the fertilizer industry are quite opposed, fearful that this will decrease their sales, particularly if they're not looking at the opportunity to develop and really benefit from new services or new fertilizer products that are more efficient. And we're seeing more and more fertilizer companies be proactive in this, which is great. The associations that represent the fertilizer industry are moving a bit more slowly. And there certainly are a diversity of reactions across different agricultural groups and agribusinesses, some of which, feel very fearful when they see what's happening and what demands are coming towards them as opposed to an opportunity to be innovative and develop new solutions. So I would say most of the opposition comes from the fertilizer industry and those that are just fearful of change.
Another from the web.
This is from Marcia Jens. How is EDF encouraging no-till farming?
Susie?
Great question. So when we're working in agriculture, it's really important to work with farmers and their advisors and work within it as a system. So it's not, well, you do fertilizer optimization sometimes here and other times you talk about cover crops, but really how do that trifecta affect farm management and what is the right combination and deployment for a given region or an individual farmer. And one of the biggest ways that we're really trying to work on that is building programs like Sustain with United Suppliers that incorporates these three components of management, the fertilizer optimization tools and technologies and products, programming and tools to help increase adoption of cover crops, and similar for reducing tillage. And also by working through demonstrations where farmers can test these things on their own farms, see what happens, and then start to implement that across a wider amount of their acres. So it's a combination of that showing and working with partners to show it and building the programming that brings together these three components.
Karen Chapman, who's another person on our team, has a blog on this on our Growing Returns blog site. So there's you could go there too and see a little bit more how we do that. Okay, question from the web.
Great. This question is from June Taylor. This nitrogen work is impressive, but the teaser about future ag or soil work is intriguing. Is boosting soil carbon on your agenda? Important to both water quality and climate carbon sequestration.
Absolutely. Boosting soil carbon is hugely on our agenda, both just in terms of the impact it has on agricultural productivity and, of course, the climate benefits. So yeah, we are working on that. The way we're most engaged with that is going back to something I was talking about earlier, which is the California carbon market, and we are working to get California to approve a rule that allows ranchers who manage their land in a particular way that sequesters more carbon in the soil to be able to participate in the market so that they can make a profit sequestering carbon on their ranches. So that is one of the protocols that we're working on. But we're also looking at the other soil quality benefits. We do these things 3 times a year called Science Days, and in October we dedicated the whole thing to soil health and soil carbon, and it was really fascinating. So yes, it's very much on our agenda. Let's take another one from the web.
Great. Can you get rid of all fertilizer pollution using voluntary efficiency measures alone? And what about regulation?
Yeah. So going back to, the short answer is no. You can't get to our goal of eliminating agriculture as a major source of fertilizer pollution just with the efficiency measures, if you think about it holistically. What I mean by that is we can reach our carbon goals just with these efficiency measures. That we can do. But when you're worried about water quality, there's always going to be a little bit of food left on the plate, going back to my earlier metaphor. You won't get it at all. And so for that, you have to figure out, well, how do I get that? And that is that you're going to pass the plate to your neighbor who hasn't eaten yet, and they will eat it. What that means is that at the edges of the field, as the water runs off the field, you need to plant these little buffers, these little filtering buffers, and those buffers then take up the remainder of the fertilizer in the plants. If I go back to EPA's estimate of how much reduction we need to fix the dead zone, you can get about 2/3 of it just from the cropping practices, the optimization and no-till, those things. You can get about 2/3 of the way there. But for the last third, you're going to need to put in these buffers and filters. So that's basically the strategy for the Mississippi. And then that ratio will vary depending on a whole bunch of things. It's really specific to the geography. So we've got about 3 more minutes. So any other questions in the room? We have one more from the web.
Certainly. This is from Dave. Are you working with Gulf Coast fishermen to help them encourage farmers to more effectively use fertilizer so that it reduces dead zones in the Gulf?
That's a tough question. You wouldn't think it's a tough question. You look at the map and you go, wow, that's a big dead zone. The fishermen must be absolutely up in arms. The issue that we found working with Gulf fishermen, and before I did this job at EDF, I ran our oceans program and spent a lot of time talking to Gulf fishermen. They have other worries. They're worried about their wetland loss. They're worried about oil spills. They're worried about overfishing and depleting the fishery. The dead zone, again, remember my list. If you worry about any one particular thing, fertilizer is on the list, but it's somewhere down, and you're more worried about oil spills or something else. So the fishermen aren't putting a ton of energy into communicating up to their brothers and sisters further up the Mississippi that, hey, you're creating a problem for us down here. As the solution actually becomes more and more real, as more and more companies like the ones that Jenny was talking about begin to put this on the agenda, it actually emboldens the voices of the fishermen, because they can see with just a little bit of effort, they might be able to actually create an important change for them. So that's kind of the situation that at least we've found with fishermen. And again, some of you may have a lot more experience with the fishermen in that region or other regions, and I'd encourage you to connect them with us, because we could use all the help we can get. Do we have to stop?
No, I think that's a good ending place. I didn't want to necessarily, we didn't forget to let people know that they can get a copy of this sent to them over email, or if they'd like to get any additional information, they should contact Chris Weichel at cweichel@edf.org. That's the same email that you RSVP'd to.
Thank you. So, Jenny and myself will be sticking around a little bit. Okay, we have one more question. Is that?
Yeah, I was just wondering, does the Clean Water Act factor into this at all? Because you mentioned threats to drinking water. Are there any existing regulations that can help?
Yes, and that's what the suit in Iowa is about. Susie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sorry for the delay getting off. I couldn't hear the question.
The question is, what about Clean Water Act and drinking water? Is that a handle for you? Is that creating incentive for farmers to think differently about fertilizer? And I referenced the lawsuit in Iowa.
It certainly does. And I think going down, pursuing regulations and legal actions is challenging. But one thing that I have seen, and certainly regulations are a big part, an important part of the picture, but as is described in our strategy, we've really been looking at the marketplace and the supply chain as a huge opportunity. And I thought it was fascinating and very exciting that when I was in Iowa in the middle of January, right after the lawsuit in Des Moines was submitted and getting lots of news, and I was in a room full of United Suppliers, retailers, and growers, and instead of lots of arguing and they can't make us do this, there was universal agreement that lawsuit is a call to action, and they need to do programs like Sustain bigger and faster and document what is going on, and they don't have a second to lose, which I thought was incredibly exciting that they looked at that and said, okay, we need to act and we need to get ahead of this with programs like Sustain and really make a difference.
So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you, everybody. I hope you found this interesting. And again, if any of this sparked any thoughts or you have suggestions for us, please send them our way. And thank you for your time.